They made something that will be remembered. Two best friends riding around the back roads of America and finding old junk that can be turned into gold. On TV, American Pickers did very well, but behind the scenes, things were going badly. Friendship between Mike Wolfe and Frank Frits was slowly broken down over years of anger and quiet. Then the sadness came. Frank died. Fans were very sad. Soon after, though, a strange story began going around online, one that made everyone jump. Some people said Mike Wolfe had been punished for his role in Frank's death. Is it possible? Was this once loved friendship hiding something much worse, or had the internet once again mixed up fantasy and fact? The news you're about to hear won't just shock you. A lot of people never got to see that part of the story. It's not like Mike Wolfe and Frank Frits were just put together for TV. Their story goes back a long time. A long time before there were antiques, road trips, or cameras. When these two met for the first time in middle school, they became friends. By 1982, they had graduated from high school together. Now in the early 2000s, Mike had already caught the picking bug and chose to start writing about his travels. His first move was to put the camera on the dashboard and start shooting as he drove from town to town, trying to find lost treasures. That thought turned into a bigger idea over time. He asked Frank to join him on camera, and the two of them began sending these early movies to different networks. But it didn't happen all at once. It was hard work and pitching for 5 years before someone finally bit. The History Channel finally saw something great. The Des Moines Register said that Mary Donahue from the network said they liked that the show wasn't just set in a shop. While Mike and Frank were on the road, they went to parts of America that they had never been before. That made the show feel new and alive. Frank did have a pretty safe job at the time, selling firefighting gear. Mike didn't really want to get into TV, but he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Thunder Press says that Mike had to really work hard to get him to quit that job and take a chance on the show. But it's clear that it paid off. American Pickers was one of those shows that was easy to love for more than 20 years. People watched Mike Wolfe and Frank Frits ride on back roads and small-town routes, stopping at old barns, dusty garages, and forgotten storage units every week. The idea was simple. Two lifelong friends who are interested in old things would look for buried gems in strange places. Danielle Colby ran things at their home base from behind the scenes, taking care of operations and making sure the business runs smoothly. The three of them took a small idea and turned it into one of the History Channel's biggest hits. But that show, the one that a lot of fans watched as kids, began to slowly fall apart, and there was no big exit or big speech to mark the event. It was more like something slowly fell apart in front of everyone at the same time. In 2020, the crack first showed up. Season 21 seemed like any other season at first. Mike and Frank were still picking and on the road just like they always did. The next show was called Burlesque Queen. That was the last time Frank Frits would be on the show. It played in March of that year. After just one show, Ghost of the West, he was gone. Nothing, not even a heads up. Even stranger was the fact that no one on the show talked about it. Not Danielle or Mike. It seemed like Frank had disappeared overnight, and no one told anyone else anything about it. Everyone had a strange time in 2020. American Pickers didn't get a new season until January 2021 because COVID stopped making the show. But when the show came back, Frank wasn't there, and fans began to notice. There was a problem. Frank's time on the show seemed to be coming to an end as a new person took his place on the road. Frank finally spoke out in the summer of 2021. He made it clear in an interview. He didn't leave American Pickers on purpose. He said he had surgery on his back and needed time to heal. Then there was a pandemic. He planned to return when the time was right, but the call never came. But being left off the show wasn't the only thing that hurt. He thought of that person as a longtime friend, but they were quiet. Frank said he hadn't talked to Mike Wolfe in more than 2 years, not even while he was healing from surgery. There was no text check-in or anything else, and that hurt a lot for someone he had worked with for decades and known since before they were famous. Frank also had his own problems to deal with. Having Crohn's disease, which he had for years, was hard for him. He got in shape and lost over 65 pounds, and didn't drink at all for almost a year. Everything he did was meant to make things better, but the one person he thought would reach out didn't. Frank also started to complain about how the show had changed, on top of the hurt he felt for himself. His view was that American Pickers was now all about Mike. He said it was like a rock band, and Mike was the lead singer, the Steven Tyler of the group. Frank didn't look angry about that part. He agreed to it, but he gave the impression that Mike might not be able to handle sharing the attention. The news was finally made public on July 21, 2021. Someone from the History Channel told Entertainment Weekly what fans had already thought for a while. It was true. Frank Frits was done with American Pickers. He wasn't just taking a break. He was not coming back because he was out. They told him that he didn't fit in with where they thought the show was going. Things had been pretty quiet up until that point. Frank had been pretty honest with a number of news sources about how he felt about how things ended between him and Mike Wolfe. But Mike, nothing. Then when the official word came out, Mike finally spoke up. He didn't give any of the drama a second thought or answer any of Frank's questions. He instead kept things light and polite, wished Frank well, and talked about how they'd been friends for a long time and were like brothers. How they began this crazy journey together in 2009. When he said goodbye, he made it sound like it would be sad because he knew Frank's friends would miss him and hoped the best for him in the future. Mike kept things calm and polite, but Danielle Colby, who has been a big part of American Pickers from the beginning, had more to say. She went on Instagram on August 2, 2021, and wrote something that made it clear who she supported. She put up a picture of herself and Mike, driving along, both of them smiling. She told Mike in her message that she was proud of how he had handled everything over the years, and that she was looking forward to many more adventures with him. She didn't forget about Frank though. She admitted that it hurt to see him go, and that it wasn't easy to see what he was going through. But one thing in her message stood out. She said that you should sometimes take responsibility for your actions, especially if they hurt other people. That line felt sharp, like she was criticizing Frank's behavior without calling him out by name. Even talked about how much pain he was in, which could have been about his drinking problems, which Frank had already talked about in interviews, or it could have been about more private things that no one knows about. By the time August 4, 2021, came around, Frank and Mike's problems had gotten a lot worse, and not in the normal way that things settled down over time behind the scenes. It felt different. At first glance, it seemed like things had calmed down, as if the whole fight had been put on hold. But Frank made it clear, he wasn't done yet. The Sun asked him if he still had the will to fight, and he said yes. There was even a petition to get him back on the show, and his fans were behind him. There was also no time for him to wait for the phone to ring. Frank said he could watch a different show, or do something else, and still enjoy himself. In the middle of all the stress, Frank was also healing from major back surgery, which was not a small process. He had a major surgery that included 185 stitches and the placement of 2 plates in his spine. The pain in his body was only one part of his battle, though. In the year 21, it was discovered that he had voluntarily checked into the Iowa Abbey Center to deal with his alcoholism. He stuck to a strict routine and read more than a dozen self-help books while he was in treatment for 77 days. It wasn't just an attempt to stay clean, it was very personal. He learned that both his mother and grandpa had problems with alcoholism and died because of it. He could relate to that. Frank took things more seriously at that point. He told them he was committed and focused. It had been almost a year since his last drink. He was still working and going to therapy twice a week, but he wanted to go back to the life he missed, being on the road, finding lost treasures, and meeting all the strange and interesting people that came with the job. Some people, like Mike Wolfe, weren't sure Frank was ready, even though he was. Mike didn't say much when he did finally speak. He said that everyone on the American Pickers team missed Frank and wanted him back. The real talk then came. Mike said Frank just couldn't get it right. Even though he didn't say what it was, the way he talked about it was enough to understand. Mike gave Frank a sign that he still had a long way to go in his recovery. While Mike said he'd love to talk to Frank again after not talking for 2 years, he also said that Frank was having a hard time individually. He was in now because he made some hard decisions that put him there. Things got really bad for Frank Frits in July 2022. His house in Davenport, Iowa, was empty when rescuers arrived. He was quickly taken to a nearby hospital. Doctors there found that he had had a major stroke. Because of how bad his situation was, he had to stay in the hospital for a whole month before being moved to a rehabilitation center. As hard as that was at first, the road to recovery would be long and steep. In addition to hurting Frank's body, the stroke completely turned his life upside down. Reports said that the costs of caring for him hit about $23,000 a month. After that, the court stepped in and appointed a temporary guardian to keep an eye on his money and health. The situation was serious, and he needed help right away. Things were made even more difficult by the fact that Frank and Mike didn't get along. They hadn't gotten along in a while, but when they found out about Frank's illness, they forgot about their old problems. Mike told the public that Frank was in the hospital and asked his friends to think about him. The news had clearly had a big impact on him, even though he didn't say much about it. Even in February 2023, Frank was still getting better. The weight of his absence kept getting to Mike. They had been traveling together for years, searching through barns and sheds, and that time had formed a bond that was hard to break. Mike freely admitted that things were different on and off the show without Frank. He made it clear that Frank's loss was a hole that would be hard to fill. It looked like Frank, Frits, and Mike Wolfe had finally started to get back together, or at least think about the chance of fixing their broken relationship again, after years of what seemed like unspoken tension and growing distance. Frank hadn't been back to the American Pickers set since 2020, but over Memorial Day weekend in 2023, something changed between them. The Quad City Times told people about it after talking to someone close to Frank. They didn't say their names, but they did say that Mike had been meaning to see Frank for a while. It was just time for Frank, but he was the one who reached out when he was ready. When they got back together, the conversation went beyond simple small talk. They talked about the early days and talked about their appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman in 2011 as one of the most important events in their careers. Feelings were strong. Frank, who was still recovering from his stroke, found the meeting to be very moving. Some real passionate tears were shed. It felt like the old link had been brought back to life for a moment. Mike even told Frank that no one else would ever be able to do his job. Like Frank, Mike's friends seemed to be thinking about the good old before the fame and before the show really took off, which added to the hope of a return. It seems that Mike had said he'd love to have Frank back on the show, but Frank was focused on getting better first. But on October 1st, 2024, the long and complicated story between Frank, Frits, and Mike Wolfe came to a quiet and sad end. Mike wrote on Instagram that day that Frank had died the day before, on September 30th, at the age of 60. Mike didn't just tell people the news in his message, he also thought about it. He said he had known Frank for more than 50 years, and that the person fans saw on TV was the same person Frank was behind the scenes. That kind of friend you might lose touch with, but never really give up on. For years, Danielle Colby shared the scene with both of them. She also wrote a tribute. They laughed together, talked about small things, and how much Frank loved his cat and his mom. These were the kinds of things that brought them together. At the end of her message, she talked about love and loss. She called him her road dog and said goodbye in the most sincere way. Now, the fact that Mike was the one to tell everyone that Frank had died says a lot. It was tense between them, and there was a long period of silence after Frank left American Pickers. But before the end, they got back to something real. Even though Frank's death at such a young age hurt fans and friends deeply, it was a small comfort to know that old scars seemed to have healed. After about a month, Mike posted again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a look back. He gave a picture of a quiet porch in Tennessee, with moving chairs and early morning light, and talked about where his mind was. He said that break was important to him, taking a break from shooting for a new season by just sitting in the quiet. It was 2004 when he thought about how crazy it would be to film himself and Frank on the road. He pondered how far they had come. There have been almost 500 shows, a lot of back roads, treasures found, and memories made. It began with two guys looking for rusty gold, but it grew into something much bigger. Mike said that the trip had been full of all sorts of things. Funny things, hard days, and times you'll never forget. The good and bad things that every family goes through. He said that the main goal of everything was always the same: sharing bits of history, telling stories that connect people, and hanging on to the past in a way that still brings people together. Fans thought things were finally calmed down, but then something strange started going around online. The whispers began in a soft voice. At first it wasn't anything big. A few people online said that Mike Wolfe from American Pickers had been arrested. There was a whisper at first, but it quickly spread like most internet drama. A lot of people began to believe it. It makes sense too. This is the guy who is known for being nice and down to earth. Someone whose whole TV show was about taking back roads and finding lost riches with a smile on his face. The thought of him going to jail, no one saw that coming, that turn of events. But this is what really happened. The whole thing is not true, says AsPrisonGuide.com. Mike Wolfe is not locked up. There has been an arrest, but neither a reputable news source nor the police force has said anything about it. Mike is still very much doing his own thing. He's still shooting American Pickers and going to his antique archaeology shop. He was even seen recently emptying a van full of things, which is something he always does. Another thing he did was pay tribute to his former co-host and close friend Frank Frits on Instagram on March 29th. People knew from that post that Mike Wolfe is free, busy, and keeping true to his roots. So where did all the mess come from? What it all seems to be about is a different guy from Oregon named Michael
Wolfe, who was found guilty in 2019 of killing his wife and son. That Michael Wolfe is 52 years old and in prison. He has nothing to do with the Mike Wolfe from American Pickers. To make things even more confusing, a post began to circulate on which used to be Twitter in March 2025. It said that a reality TV star had just been arrested, and everyone thought it was Mike right away. Even though the link to a sketchy website with no proof, receipts, or facts, just clickbait, the post got a lot of attention. In the end, there is only one truth. Mike Wolfe has never been arrested or been in jail. The only thing on his record is a single speeding ticket from the 1980s.